It was a dark and stormy night, and Jane was driving home from her friend's house. As she drove along the winding road, she noticed an old, abandoned house in the distance. Despite her better judgment, she felt drawn to it. Pulling up to the house, Jane felt a chill run down her spine. The house looked like it hadn't been lived in for years, with shattered windows and a creaky front door that hung off its hinges. Despite her growing unease, Jane stepped inside the house. As she walked through the halls, she felt like she was being watched. Suddenly, she heard a sound coming from upstairs, a faint whispering that grew louder and more insistent by the moment. Jane climbed the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached the top, she saw a figure standing in the hallway. It was a woman, dressed in a long, flowing gown, with hair that seemed to float around her face like smoke. Jane froze, unable to move or speak. The woman began to speak, her voice cold and otherworldly.
"I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for someone to release me from this cursed house. You cannot leave. You will be trapped here with me forever."
Jane screamed and pushed past the woman, running out into the rain. She didn't stop running until she was safely in her car, with the old house nothing but a memory in the distance. From that day on, Jane avoided the old house at all costs, afraid that the woman would find her again and never let her leave. Days turned into weeks, and Jane tried her best to forget about the terrifying encounter at the abandoned house. However, she found it increasingly difficult to shake off the feeling that she was being watched wherever she went. She started having nightmares about the woman in the long gown, haunting her every thought. One night, Jane woke up to find her bedroom window open, even though she was sure she had locked it before going to bed. A gust of wind blew in, and she shivered, feeling like someone was in the room with her. Suddenly, she heard the whispering again, the same whispering she had heard in the abandoned house. She turned on the lamp on her nightstand, but the light flickered and went out. Jane screamed and reached for her phone, intending to call for help. But as she dialed, she realized that there was no signal. She was completely cut off from the outside world. Panic set in, and Jane realized that she was trapped. She stumbled out of bed and tried to make her way to the door, but something pulled her back. It was the woman in the long gown, standing in the corner of the room, her eyes glowing in the darkness.
"I told you that you would be trapped with me forever."
Jane screamed and tried to run, but she found herself frozen in place. She was trapped, with no way out. The next morning, Jane's friends found her body in her bedroom, with a look of terror frozen on her face. No one could explain what had happened to her. It was as if she had been trapped in a nightmare that she could never escape. And to this day, no one has ever been able to explain the mysterious whispers that were heard coming from the abandoned house, or the ghostly figure of the woman in the long gown. After Jane's death, the abandoned house became even more infamous in the town. People would tell stories about the woman in the long gown, warning others to stay away from the haunted house. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the house for themselves. They laughed and joked as they made their way inside, not believing in any of the ghost stories they had heard. But as they climbed the stairs, they heard the same whispering that Jane had heard. They turned to run, but found themselves trapped, just like Jane had been. The teenagers were never seen again. Years went by, and the abandoned house fell into further disrepair. But the stories of the woman in the long gown continued to be told, and people still whispered about the haunted house. One night, a man named Tom was driving home from work when his car broke down in front of the abandoned house. He tried to call for help, but his phone was dead. With no other options, he decided to take shelter in the house for the night. Tom made his way inside, feeling the same sense of unease that Jane had felt all those years ago. As he walked through the halls, he heard the whispering, just like the teenagers had. But instead of running away, he followed the sound. He climbed the stairs and found himself face to face with the woman in the long gown. But instead of feeling fear, Tom felt a strange sense of peace. The woman looked at him, her eyes no longer glowing.
I have been waiting for someone to release me from this cursed house.
Tom understood what he had to do. He left the abandoned house and gathered a group of volunteers to help restore it, to give the woman in the long gown a final resting place. And when they were finished, the whispers and ghostly apparitions stopped, as if the woman had finally found peace. The abandoned house was never haunted again. And though people still remembered the stories of the woman in the long gown, they were no longer afraid. For they knew that she had finally been released from her curse.